Most people come home to a warm meal, but I came home to my entire life sitting in a puddle of rainwater on the front lawn. And my mother, she was standing on the porch with a smirk, holding the one thing I told her never to touch. I've spent 3 years working double shifts at the hospital, barely sleeping, just to keep a roof over our heads. I thought we were a team. I thought she appreciated the sacrifices I made to stop the bank from taking this house. But as I stood there watching my expensive medical textbooks soak up the mud, I realized something chilling. My mother didn't just want me out, she wanted to destroy me. What she didn't realize, however, was that in her rush to throw me away, she'd overlooked a single legal detail that was about to turn her world upside down. She thought she was the queen of this castle, but she was about to find out she didn't even own the bricks. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was that consistent, annoying drizzle that makes everything feel twice as miserable. I pulled my old sedan into the driveway at 7:15 p.m., my back aching from a 12-hour shift. All I wanted was a hot shower and to finish the last chapter of my residency prep. But the driveway was blocked, not by another car but by heaps of black plastic bags. Some were ripped open. I saw my favorite blue sweater, the one my grandmother knitted for me, half buried under a pile of old shoes. My heart didn't just drop, it shattered. I stepped out of the car, the cold water immediately seeping into my scrubs. "Mom," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Mom, what is this?" The front door creaked open. My mother, Brenda, stepped out. She wasn't crying. She wasn't frantic. She looked satisfied. She was holding a glass of wine in one hand and my laptop bag in the other. My heart stopped. That laptop had 3 years of research on it. "You're late with the gratitude, Savannah," she said, her voice cold and steady. "I decided it was time for a change. I'm turning your room into a craft studio. Since you're never here anyway, I figured you wouldn't mind finding a place that suits your busy lifestyle." "You threw my stuff in the dirt?" I gestured wildly at the lawn. "I pay for this house, Mom. I pay the electricity, the water, the groceries. How could you do this?" She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that made my skin crawl. "You pay bills, sweetie, but this is my house. My name is on the memories here. You're just a guest who overstayed her welcome. Now take your trash and get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." She dropped my laptop bag. It hit the concrete step with a sickening thud. I stood there, paralyzed. The neighbors were starting to peek through their curtains. The humiliation was a physical weight in my chest. For years I had carried her. When Dad left and the mortgage fell behind, I was the one who stepped up. I took the loans. I worked the graveyard shifts. I sacrificed my youth so she wouldn't have to sell her precious garden, and this was my reward. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the sadness started to evaporate. In its place, a cold, hard clarity began to settle. She thought she was untouchable because she gave birth to me. She thought her seniority gave her the right to be a tyrant. "You really want me to leave, Mom?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "By tonight," she replied, taking a slow sip of her wine. "I've already changed the deadbolt." I nodded slowly, reaching into my soaked pocket. I didn't grab my keys, I grabbed my phone. I didn't call a friend, I didn't call a locksmith. I opened my banking app and then my legal files folder. "Okay, Brenda," I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. The look of shock on her face was almost worth the ruined clothes. "Have it your way, but you should have checked the mail today." Brenda's eyes narrowed as she stepped back into the house, slamming the door and locking the deadbolt with a final metallic click. I stood in the rain for a moment, the silence of the neighborhood ringing in my ears. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I began picking up my soaked belongings, one bag at a time, tossing them into the trunk and backseat of my car. My laptop was the last thing I grabbed. I prayed the internal drive was still intact as I wiped the mud off the casing. As I sat in the driver's seat, the heater blasting to thaw my frozen fingers, I pulled up the document I'd been keeping on my phone for months. It was a digital copy of the deed transfer and the mortgage restructuring agreement. See, my mother had a habit of forgetting things when they didn't suit her narrative. 2 years ago, when the bank was literally days away from putting a foreclosure sign on the front lawn, she had sat at the kitchen table, sobbing, begging me to save her. I was 22, working 3 jobs, and I made a choice. I told her I would take over the debt, but only if the house was legally mine. She had signed the papers without even reading them, too relieved to lose her social standing to care about the fine print. I put the car in gear and drove to a 24-hour printing shop 10 minutes away. My mind was racing, calculating every move like a game of high-stakes chess. When I walked in, the clerk looked at my soaked scrubs and messy hair but didn't say a word. I printed out 3 copies of the deed and a formal notice to quit for the state of Illinois. This wasn't just a daughter being petty. This was a landlord exercising her rights. My mother thought she was the one in control because she birthed me, but the law doesn't care about DNA, it cares about signatures and stamps. While the printer hummed, I called my uncle, her brother, who had always been the voice of reason in our family. "Uncle Jerry, it's Savannah. Brenda just threw my life in the yard. I'm moving into a hotel tonight, but I need you to know what's coming next. Don't try to talk me out of it." Jerry sighed on the other end, but he didn't sound surprised. He knew his sister's temper better than anyone. "Savannah, just be careful," he warned. "She thinks that house is her identity." I hung up, grabbed my papers, and headed to a local motel. That night I didn't sleep. I spent the hours organizing my evidence and emailing my lawyer. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I wasn't the tired nurse my mother knew. I was a woman with a plan. I drove back to the house, but I didn't park in the driveway. I parked on the street. I walked up to the front door and taped the first copy of the eviction notice right over the brand new deadbolt she was so proud of. Then I sat in my car and waited. It didn't take long. Around 9:30 a.m., the door swung open. Brenda was dressed for her morning yoga, looking refreshed and triumphant. Then she saw the paper. From my car, I watched her face go from confusion to a deep, ugly red. She ripped the paper off the door and started looking around wildly. When her eyes landed on my car, she marched down the lawn, the paper crumpled in her fist. She pounded on my window. "What is this sick joke, Savannah? You think you can evict me from my own home? I am your mother." I rolled the window down just an inch, my voice calm and devoid of the emotion she wanted. "It's not a joke, Brenda. Read the name on the deed attached to that notice. You have 24 hours to vacate, or the sheriff will be here to assist you." Brenda erupted into a fit of laughter that sounded more like a screech. She stood there on the sidewalk, waving the crumpled papers in the air as if they were nothing more than confetti. "You really think some fancy lawyer talk changes the fact that I raised you in this house? I bought this place when you were in diapers, Savannah. You think a judge is going to throw a mother out for her ungrateful daughter?" I didn't blink. I didn't argue. I simply tapped the screen of my phone and played a recording from 2 years ago. It was the day we sat at the kitchen table with the notary. Her own voice filled the air, clear and desperate, saying, "I don't care who owns it, Savannah, just pay the bank so I can keep my garden." The laughter died in her throat. Her face turned a ghostly shade of white as the reality began to sink in. She realized that I hadn't just been paying the bills, I had been securing my future while she was busy trying to maintain a facade of wealth. She tried to reach through the cracked window to grab my phone, but I rolled it up before she could touch it. "You have until tomorrow morning," I said through the glass. "I suggest you start packing the things you didn't throw in the mud." I drove away, leaving her standing there, paralyzed with shock. But I knew Brenda. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. By noon, my phone was blowing up with texts from distant cousins and family friends. She was playing the victim, telling everyone that I had gone insane and was trying to make her homeless. My phone screen was a constant stream of insults. "How could you? And you're a monster." I ignored them all. I spent the afternoon at a local storage facility renting a unit for my own things, and then I met with a locksmith. I wasn't going to play the game of changing locks back and forth. I was doing this by the book. That evening, I saw a moving truck pull into the driveway of my house, but it wasn't for her. She had called her friends to come and help her protect the property. They were moving her heavy furniture into the garage and boarding up the windows from the inside. She was turning my house into a fortress. It was a classic Brenda move. She thought that if she stayed inside and refused to leave, I would eventually give up. She thought the optics of a daughter calling the police on her mother would be too much for me to handle. What she forgot was that I had spent the last 3 years working in the ER. I had seen every kind of drama, every kind of manipulation, and every kind of tragedy. My skin had grown thick and my heart had grown cold toward her antics. I called the sheriff's office and confirmed the appointment for the following morning. I also called the utility companies. Since the accounts were all in my name and I had a legal eviction notice on file, I had every right to request a temporary suspension of services for maintenance. By 8 p.m., the lights in the house flickered and died. The heating system groaned to a halt. The neighborhood was quiet, but I knew inside that dark house, Brenda was fuming, sitting in the cold, realizing that her power was an illusion. She had the walls, but I had the foundation. She had the memories, but I had the deed. And tomorrow, the world would see exactly who this house belonged to. I sat in my motel room, looking at the ruins of my medical textbooks, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The loop was closing. The sun hadn't even fully risen when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching on the gravel. I was already there, waiting in my car with a thermos of coffee and a folder full of original documents. The house looked tomb-like in the gray morning light, dark and cold without the power I'd cut the night before. The sheriff, a no-nonsense man named Miller, walked up to my window. "You sure about this, Savannah? It's a tough thing to do to family." I looked at him, then at the pile of my ruined belongings still sitting in the corner of the yard, soaked and pathetic. "She made her choice when she threw my life in the trash, Sheriff. I'm just taking back what I paid for." He nodded, adjusted his belt, and walked toward the front door. He didn't have to knock twice. Brenda opened the door, looking like a ghost of herself. Her hair was a mess, she was wrapped in a thick blanket, and the smugness from 2 days ago was completely gone. She started to wail the moment she saw the badge, a high-pitched, performative sob that used to work on me when I was a kid. "Officer, you can't do this. This is my home. My daughter is heartless," she cried, clutching the doorframe. Sheriff Miller didn't flinch. He handed her the final notice. "Ma'am, we've verified the deed and the eviction order. This property belongs to Savannah. You've had 24 hours to pack your essentials. Now you have 20 minutes to take what you can carry before I escort you off the premises." The silence that followed was heavy. Brenda looked past the sheriff, her eyes finding mine as I stood by my car. The hatred in her gaze was intense, but for the first time in my life, it didn't make me flinch. I watched her retreat inside to grab a suitcase. Her fortress had crumbled. Her friends, who had been so brave the night before, were nowhere to be found when the law actually showed up. They didn't want to get arrested for obstructing justice. They were only there for the drama. 20 minutes later, Brenda walked out of the house for the last time. She carried one suitcase and a small box of jewelry. As she passed me, she hissed, "You'll regret this. No one will ever love a daughter who kicks her mother onto the street." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I waited until she was in her car and the sheriff had handed me the keys. I walked up to the front door, peeled her craft room sign off the wood, and stepped inside. The house was freezing, but it was finally quiet. The toxic cloud she'd maintained over my life for years had finally lifted. I didn't stay long that morning. I had work. I drove to the hospital, did my rounds, and treated my patients with the same steady hand as always. When I returned that evening, the power was back on and the locksmith had finished the new security system. I stood in my room, the one she tried to take, and realized that the belongings she threw out were just things. They could be replaced. But the self-respect I gained by standing up to her, that was priceless. Brenda ended up staying with her brother Jerry, who called me a week later to tell me she was already complaining about the guest room. I told him he was welcome to keep her as long as he liked, but my door was closed for good. My house was no longer a place of sacrifice and hidden tears. It was mine. And every time I walk past that yard, I don't see the trash she threw out. I see the place where I finally stood my ground.